There are moments in history that feel less like fact and more like myth. The story of the Aztec Empire's fall is definitely one of them. It's this epic tragedy, right? A collision of two worlds, two empires, and really two men, all at a single explosive point in time. This isn't just a story about a conquest. It's the story of a civilization staring its own apocalypse right in the face. So imagine this. What if your gods, the ones your entire culture is built on, were prophesied to return? And then one day, they actually show up. This question, it just hung over the entire Aztec civilization like a giant storm cloud. See, for centuries, a prophecy foretold the return of a pale-bearded god from the Eastern Sea. And then in 1519, sails appear on the horizon, bringing, you guessed it, pale-bearded men from the east. For the Aztec emperor, a man named Montezuma, this wasn't an invasion. Oh no. This was destiny knocking at his door. To really wrap our heads around how a few hundred Spaniards could topple an empire of millions, we have to start not with them, but with the world of the Aztecs. It was a world of just breathtaking magnificence and power, but it was also one that was deeply, deeply shadowed by superstition and a prophecy that seemed to predict its own end. Right at the very heart of the Aztec spiritual world was this prophecy, all about a god named Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. The legend said he was tall, had white skin, and a long flowing beard. And after he taught the people all the arts of civilization, he sailed away across the Eastern Sea. But, and this is the crucial part, he made a solemn promise. One day, he would return to reclaim his kingdom. Now, this wasn't just some fairy tale. It was a deeply ingrained belief that shaped the mind of the emperor himself, and it would end up being the empire's greatest vulnerability. And what a kingdom it was! The Aztec world, which they called Anahuac, was a sprawling domain. From their incredible island capital, Tenochtitlan, a city that literally looked like it was floating on water, the Aztecs dominated hundreds of other city-states. But here's the thing. This wasn't some happy, unified empire. It was a patchwork of conquered peoples, held together by sheer force and fear, all of them forced to pay a heavy tribute of goods and, well, human lives to their masters in the capital. The currency of that fear, it was blood. This number, 20,000, that's the low-end estimate of people sacrificed every single year on the altars of the Aztec gods. Their entire view of the universe was fueled by this belief that without constant human sacrifice, the sun itself would refuse to rise. So war wasn't just for territory, it was for capturing victims for their altars. It was a spiritual belief grounded in an almost industrial scale of brutality. And all of this reveals the empire's central weakness. Yeah, it was vast, but it was incredibly brittle. The constant demand for tribute and sacrificial victims bred this deep, simmering resentment. Rebellions were always being put down brutally, but the anger never really went away. And right on their borders were powerful enemies, like the warrior republic of Tlaxcala, who had resisted Aztec rule for generations and hated them with a burning passion. And at the head of it all, Montezuma, an emperor who had become more of a high priest, totally consumed by dark omens and basically paralyzed by that prophecy of the returning god. So you have this tense, complex situation, and now, from the other side of the world, a new force sails right into it. A force of nature in human form. An obscure Spanish nobleman with an ambition so terrifying and so absolute, it could rival the Aztec gods themselves, Hernán Cortés. In 1519, the exact year the Aztec calendar prophesied Quetzalcoatl's return, believe it or not, Cortés arrives. He's got about 500 men, maybe 13 horses, and a few cannons. But here's the kicker. He was a mutineer. He was acting against the explicit orders of his boss, the governor of Cuba. This wasn't some official royal expedition. It was a desperate, totally illegal gamble. For Cortés, failure meant a hangman's noose. So for him, there was absolutely no turning back. The difference between the two forces was just staggering. The Aztecs had thousands of disciplined, ferocious warriors. Their main weapon, the macuahuitl, was this wooden club edged with razor-sharp obsidian glass. It could literally decapitate a horse. But the Spanish had steel swords and armor, which could shatter those obsidian blades. They had cavalry. The Aztecs had never seen horses before, and at first, they thought the man and the beast were one terrifying centaur-like creature. But the biggest difference? It was tactical. The Spanish fought to kill. The Aztecs, on the other hand, fought to capture because a live prisoner was the ultimate prize for their gods. And that single cultural difference would end up saving the Spanish from being wiped out time and time again. So, Cortés is faced with this vast, unknown continent and a crew that's on the verge of mutiny. And he makes one of the most audacious moves in all of military history. First, he legally establishes his own town, Veracruz, which makes him accountable only to the King of Spain, not the governor of Cuba. Clever, right? Then, after finding out there's a plot to seize the ships and sail back, he has them secretly destroyed, scuttled. He gathered his men on the beach, pointed inland towards the unknown, and made it crystal clear. There was no escape. They would either conquer this new world and get rich beyond their wildest dreams, or they would die right here. The gamble was now absolute. And so it began, the march inland. It was this journey of incredible hardship, but also of brilliant political maneuvering. Cortés was a master at reading people, at seeing their ambitions and their hatreds. He figured out really quickly that the Aztec Empire was basically a web of resentments, just waiting to be pulled apart. He wasn't just a conqueror. To all of Montezuma's enemies, he looked like a liberator. The march was really a masterclass in strategy and pure terror. First, he fought and then cleverly allied with the fierce Tlaxcalans, gaining thousands of battle-hardened warriors who knew the terrain and, more importantly, knew how to fight the Aztecs. Then he hears about a planned ambush in the holy city of Cholula, so he springs his own trap, massacring the city's nobility with his new Tlaxcalan allies. The message was brutal, and it was clear: defy us, and you will be annihilated. And then, finally, they crested the mountains and they saw it. Their prize. This question, spoken to Cortés by a local chieftain along the way, it just perfectly captures the sheer scale of Montezuma's power. It was an empire built on the idea that it was inevitable. This lord couldn't even imagine a power that wasn't under Montezuma's thumb. And Cortés, with his tiny band of exhausted men, he just replied that he and his king were definitely not vassals. I mean, the audacity is just breathtaking. What the Spaniards finally saw when they got to the Valley of Mexico just defied belief. They'd marched through jungles, they'd climbed over mountains, probably expecting a world of mud huts and savages. And instead, they were rewarded with a vision. A city that looked like it was torn straight from the pages of a fantasy novel. You can just hear the cry from the conquistadors, right? It is the promised land! Before them lay this great lake, and right in the middle of it, gleaming white, was Tenochtitlan. It was connected to the shore by these massive stone causeways, wide enough for 10 horsemen to ride side by side. It was bigger, cleaner, and more orderly than any city in Europe at the time. For these soldiers, who had risked absolutely everything on a mad gamble, it must have felt like they had found Eden itself. And you can't blame them for their awe. Canals served as streets, just teeming with thousands of canoes carrying goods and people. Huge marketplaces were filled with products from all across the empire. They saw that chinampas, these ingenious floating gardens that fed the entire city. And everywhere you looked, rising towards the sky, were the steep pyramids of their temples, stained with the smoke of offerings. It was a true metropolis, the Venice of the New World. And the Spaniards just walked right into it, as guests of a very bewildered emperor. So here it is. The fates of two entire empires come down to this one meeting between two men. On one side, you have Montezuma, the fatalist, totally convinced these were the messengers of the god Quetzalcoatl. He showers Cortés with gifts of gold, hoping to appease them, maybe convince them to leave. But for Cortés, the ultimate pragmatist, these gifts weren't a deterrent. Oh no, they were confirmation of the incredible wealth that was now just within his grasp. He knew he was in a gilded cage, surrounded by 1 million people, and he knew he had to seize the initiative or be destroyed. And so Cortés makes his most audacious move yet. Under the pretext of a minor skirmish that happened on the coast, he marches into Montezuma's palace with a few dozen of his captains and, through sheer force of will, places the emperor under arrest. He takes the god-king hostage in his own city. By holding the head of the empire, he now controlled the empire itself. It was a checkmate of pure psychological genius. But a situation like that could never last. While Cortés was away dealing with a rival Spanish force that had landed on the coast, his lieutenant back in the city panicked and massacred Aztec nobles during a religious festival. The city just exploded in fury. The Spanish were driven out in this chaotic, bloody retreat that became known as La Noche Triste, the sad night. They lost half their men. But Cortés, he was not a man to accept defeat. He was a man who planned revenge, and he would be back. And he didn't return alone. He came back with an army of over 100,000 Tlaxcalans and other native allies who saw this as their one chance to finally destroy their ancient oppressors. And this is the crucial, often overlooked fact of the story. The final conquest of the Aztecs really became a brutal civil war, with the Spanish acting as this terrifying catalyst. The final battle was won not just with swords, but with strategy and some ruthless engineering. Cortés had his men build a fleet of small warships called brigantines right there on the shore of the lake. This gave him total control of the water, cutting off all food and supplies to the island city. The Aztecs, now led by the heroic Cuauhtémoc, fought for every single block with just unimaginable ferocity. So Cortés made a terrible decision. To win, he had to destroy the very city he admired so much. As his forces advanced, they leveled every building, filling the canals with the rubble. The siege lasted for 80 days. Starvation and, even more devastatingly, smallpox, a disease the natives had zero immunity to, wiped out tens of thousands. The end was apocalyptic. The city of dreams became a house of death. On August 13, 1521, the last pockets of resistance were finally crushed, and from the smoking ruins of Tenochtitlan, a new world, new Spain, would be born. And if you want to understand the world that was lost, just think about this. Before the siege even began, Cortés's men counted the skulls on just one of the great skull racks outside the main temple. The number they recorded was 136,000. It's a chilling, almost incomprehensible figure that speaks to the sheer scale of life, death, and belief in this civilization that was now just utterly destroyed. So we're left with this question, aren't we? The Aztec Empire was a marvel of civilization, for sure, but it was also this totalitarian state built on sacrifice and oppression. And it fell not just to a few hundred Spaniards, but to the tidal wave of hatred it had created among its own subject peoples. It's a brutal reminder that sometimes the very things that give an empire its power can also plant the seeds of its own destruction.